Hi everybody, Dane Litwin here, and welcome back to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers. This week, talking about teaching staff to work with volunteers and to value volunteer impact and to really understand the role as an entire team that any paid employee, a volunteer plays towards a common mission or goal. And this is, again, another super hot topic. I've seen a lot of threads on this, so I thought I'd chime in with what I've created as the outline or top tips for an in-service staff training to do to get them familiar and comfortable with the volunteer program basics, and especially volunteer engagement and working with volunteers directly. I typically would do this with agencies that I worked for full-time or as a consultant with about a once a year, 1 hour in-service training. Ideally, that was in person or at least live over Zoom or online, but this can also be created as an asynchronous learning event where you have this information in short little videos or something else on an e-learning platform that you might use, or just as YouTube or embedded videos, Vimeo, whatever service you want to use with your agency. There are 3 basic attitudes that paid employees have towards volunteers. They're either neutral, or they are hostile, or they have a pretty positive viewpoint or experience and are pretty good with working with volunteers. The point of doing a learning event, a training, an in-service like this is to move anyone who's hostile at least a notch over to neutral, if not to positive, and anyone who's neutral or thinks, well, I don't ever really work with volunteers, I never think about it, it never occurs to me that even if they are not going to be working directly or supervising volunteers or working with them on a special project, that they at least have a basic understanding and some basic messaging for recruitment and community engagement whenever they're having conversations with friends and family or their other contacts in the agency or out in the community. So it's really important that whether these employees work directly with volunteers or not, that this is an all hands in service that's either available to everybody, or you could put it up a notch and have this be part of every employee onboarding is basics of the volunteer program, how to talk about it, the 3-word, 30-second elevator pitch, recruitment pitch, and the knowledge of who to get in touch with if someone is interested in being a volunteer, a donor, or some other kind of supporter. So this is really about not just having staff understand the value of working with volunteers and the impact that volunteers bring to the agency, but primarily also to kind of make everyone an ambassador, and ideally those who are already very positive about volunteers, make them your lead cheerleaders or lead presenters if you want to do training the trainer or have this as an ongoing learning event instead of a once a year one-off or a recorded video. Or you could do it as all 3 and kind of meet everyone where they are with their learning styles. So when you have this training, the key phrase, and I learned this in Shanti and working with Project Open Hand early in my career, the key phrase that you want everyone in the learning session to come away with is that every interaction with a volunteer is an invitation to stay or an invitation to go. So if people at least remember that phrase and start to kind of live it, thank yous are free, smiles are free, that's a really good start. When you're outlining, creating this training, here's how I did the shape of show, if we want to call it that. I did that assessment kind of in my own mind of do I already know who is positive, a great cheerleader, works with volunteers? Can I highlight their work during this session and going forward, or do I highlight their work? Who do I think is neutral? And do I know who is hostile, and will they need maybe a little extra attention or information, not just during this training, but following up afterwards and seeing how they can be more successful in interacting with volunteers, or at least help again shift that attitude from hostile to neutral, or ideally to positive. So outlining the session, kind of start with that assessment. What's your assessment of where people are? And then ask them, open it up with, hey, has anyone had a good experience as a volunteer? And see who raises their hand. And it can be a volunteer with their current agency or another agency, like who's had a good experience as a volunteer. And have them popcorn, or if people want to share, what made it good? What was good about it? Did they feel valued? Did they feel welcome? Did they have a meaningful experience? Did they have a fun experience? And then ask, well, who had a bad experience as a volunteer? So shifting it to them as volunteers. And there might be some people in the room who, for whatever reason, they work in nonprofits or government agencies, but they've never volunteered themselves. That's fine. We'll get around to communicating with them, but kind of get the temperature in the room of who's been a volunteer, had a good experience and had a bad experience, and do a little bit of open discussion on, well, what made that experience good or bad? Was the bad one that you felt like your time was wasted, or you weren't valued, or things were disorganized, or you tried to volunteer somewhere and nobody ever got back to you? So that kind of opens it up and creates a more personal, emotional connection, makes it less abstract. If people start to think of themselves in the volunteer's role, that can kind of help create understanding and maybe even build some more empathy. The next piece to it, after kind of that little popcorn discussion, is then give everybody, and this can be a PowerPoint, it can be slides, or you can have props or you're in person, but give at least a 20-30 minutes, and again, usually this is all about an hour, but try about 20 minutes of the basics of how your organization's volunteer program runs. What are the basic roles and schedules? What are the basic requirements of age or background checks or driver's license or certification in CPR or whatever it might be? And then in that section of the basics, get everyone clear on what is your recruitment message. Is it join our team? Is it, as I've talked about recently, cuddle penguin chicks? Like, what is it that is the overall call to action with your organization? Never say need. I talk about that here. But what is the overall messaging that volunteers are getting? And make sure that staff know that messaging as well. And hopefully by the end of the in-service training or the end of those basics, they can have at least a 30-second elevator pitch with any member of the community about volunteering, donating, or otherwise supporting your organization. So kind of mixing in that messaging that all team members get is an important part of them understanding the basics of the volunteer program. You might have time to go into what are some policies, what are a couple of processes, but make it pretty short and just pretty high level so that people get the basic understanding of how volunteers have mission impact on the work. The next piece is show and tell. Show how volunteers have real impact on the work that your organization is doing. Tie it directly into the strategic goals or mission statement of the agency, and do a show and tell with data visualization, again, slides or graphs, that is more than the numbers. My dear friend and colleague, Rosanna Galindo, likes to say that numbers numb, and we have a lot of information, Tuesday tips from her and others on how to do data storytelling. I'll link to some of the webinars I've done with her about data storytelling here. But you want to give folks the understanding and knowledge of how volunteers are part of their team. Then go back into an open discussion where there's Q&A, or if people have specific issues that they want to role play or role-playing conversations. And again, all of this can be about an hour, maybe an hour and a half at the most. 90 minutes is about the limit of any kind of in-person sitting down training session, or maybe there's a little bit of standing and again, kind of having role-play conversations or scenarios or Q&A. But really make sure that by the end of it, people leave with the idea and a deep understanding that this is all one team in the agency working together for common goals. You may be in different departments, you have different job titles, and it's really up to everybody to play their part, whether they are paid employees, contractors, vendors, or volunteers. And volunteer is a good reminder to folks in these training sessions that that's not a job title, that's a pay schedule. That's kind of a legal pay definition of the work they're doing, but that there are specifics to the roles and the job descriptions that volunteers do. And if you want to highlight some volunteers in particular, or again, your colleagues that are in the room that are already great cheerleaders and ambassadors, to tell some of their success stories, that's a really good way to approach this in-service. So I hope you've enjoyed these 10 minutes of Tuesday tips on training staff to value and work with volunteers. If you like Tuesday tips and you're not yet subscribed, hit that little button. Tell your friends, share this with everyone who you think can benefit from learning about Tuesday tips on my Priceless Advice channel. Hit like, share this all around, and we'll see you next time with more Tuesday tips. Take care.